You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in.
a Mamamia podcast.
From Mamamia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, a weekly interview podcast with people who tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable.
Claudia Karvan, my 15-year-old daughter wants to have a baby.
She does not.
She does. It's all your fault.
You're lying. I think
she
probably
does. She did
she
it
probably wants a
before.
hysterectomy is what she really wants.
Well, after watching Bump, she's like, I just want a baby.
Are you serious?
So it's your fault.
We're going to have to monitor the population of Australia. Currently, I think it's 2% of births are teenage pregnancies.
Wow.
So we'll have to see if we move the needle. If we move the needle on that.
I think you might move the needle on
On
the
New Year's
teen
Day, we woke up
pregnancy.
to a television show that made us fall in love with Australian television all over again. The Stan original series Bump broke records for the streaming service and was renewed for a second season within weeks. It was that good. Behind it and in front of it is one of Australia's most respected writers. She's also an actress, she's a producer, she was my guest on No Filter on Monday, and we wanted to hear more from her, so we thought we would make this extra episode all about the making of Bump with Claudia Karvan.
I think you might be having a baby.
No way. She's having a baby. Congratulations. Wow, this explains the random crying and violent mood swings.
From COVID dramas to using a cast of lots of people who'd never been in a TV show before, Claudia Karvan and the team behind Bump battled so many odds to get the 10-part series to our screens in time for the new year. What they created was absolutely magic. One of my favourite stories she tells is about the drama they had around finding a newborn baby. You got to listen to that story. So if you're wondering how they did it, here is Claudia talking all things Bump.
You've worked so famously with ensemble casts, like the most memorable roles that you've had to me. You're always like the matriarch in Secret Life of Us and Love My Way and Bump. What's the dynamic like of an ensemble cast?
The dynamic on Bump was sort of unprecedented for me, and I don't know if that's because there was a lot of young kids, but also first-timers, actors who haven't acted in this country before or at all. And that creates a sort of electricity and a generosity. And there's sort of not the slight level of professional competition that might come into play in other situations. So Bump, for me, has been the most successful and generous and wonderful ensemble cast.
Who'd never acted before, which characters?
Oh, heaps. Ioane, Sauer, the Samoan boy, Vince. Or Paula Garcia, who came from, she's Colombian, but she came from France. She'd never acted in Australia before. Catalina,
Which
she
one
played
did
Rosa.
Yeah.
Catalina Palmer, who had studied in Santiago and just come to Australia within a year. She'd never acted on television before. She played Angel. Claudia de Gasti, who's Argentinian, she played Bernadita. She'd never acted. The grandmother never acted before.
Where did you find these people?
Miguel, who played Alejandro, Ricardo, who played Matias, none of them had acted before.
Where did you find these people, and also why did you want to cast all these people who'd never acted before? That sounds like a nightmare.
It wasn't. It so wasn't a nightmare. And
Clearly
Leticia,
it wasn't, but you didn't know that going in.
No, but, you know, it's great to take a risk. Like, why wouldn't you? But Leticia Cáceres, who's Argentinian, she directed The Last Block. So she was a great help in terms of culturally and with the language. And
How do you go about casting a show?
well, it's Kirsten McGregor. She's a goddess. It's really high on her radar, you know, diversity. And, you know, she's just a big part of the creative team. She was on Dr. Doctor as well. So she's, sometimes casting agents can sort of be, you know, almost like they're sort of contractors almost. Or you can have someone like Kirsty who literally rings you up and says, does this character have to be a man? Can it be a woman? Could this person be in a wheelchair? Could this person be Filipino? I've got this, you know, she's always looking out for opportunities for
Inclusivity.
and interesting new actors.
I heard you say, someone asked you about the diversity, and isn't it great? And there's such diversity, and you pointed out the diversities are a kind of a white word.
Yeah, there's a great article in Arts Hub that says diversity is a white word. Because essentially what the article was saying is, yes, we want, colour and movement and differences on our screens, but really the power is still at the top with all the gatekeepers, with all the producers, with often a lot of the writers, and it needs to be across the board. And often those diverse roles are being written by white people. So, for instance, Ioane, beautiful actor, beautiful boy, 18 years old, never acted before. So we'd sort of invented this sort of, foul-mouthed best friend who was sort of a contrast to our Santi character. When we met Ioane, he was like, will I have to actually smoke marijuana on set because I've never smoked it before and I'm a bit worried about it. And I've got another question. Will I get to hold the baby because I really love babies? And we were like, oh my God, we've gone to this like stupid islander archetype. So we just adjusted all the scripts and made sure that he did an interview recently where he said, my character's a lot more sort of mindful and evolved than I actually am. So,
his character's quite feminist.
Yeah, he's beautiful.
He's divine. But where did you find him?
Self-tape. So Kirsty will just put out stuff on Facebook and, anyone who's got an interest will send in a tape from home. And Ioane just did this pretty shabby looking, it was not very well shot and you couldn't really see him very well. It was sort of in profile from his lounge room and he was reading opposite his brother who doesn't have a lot of acting ability, but you could still see he had timing and he was unselfconscious and had ability.
What about the two leads, Ollie and Santi? How did they come about being cast?
Well, Natalie Morris she grew up in Canberra. Kirsty was aware of her, and even before we'd booked Kirsty to do the casting job, she just said, look, even if I'm not on the project, you have to use Natalie Morris. You have to look at her for Ollie. Her and I met over Zoom. Her audition was just, crazily good. Like suddenly all the writers were going, oh, wow, look at my material. It's just singing. She just got it.
What scene do you decide to give someone?
She did about 4 scenes from the first and second episodes, checking the emotional range and the comedy timing and whether she got the tone of it. And she just kicked it out of the park and it was ridiculous. It's like, oh, well, there she is. We've got our Ollie, which was a huge relief. It's the first time I've sort of looked at a young person and gone, oh, you remind me of myself when I was that age. It was really uncanny. And I couldn't work out what it was. I couldn't work out what it was, but then we were talking. I said, how have you been finding COVID? And she said, it's great because I'm a bit of an introvert and I just read a lot. And I was like, okay, what are you reading? And the 3 books she said I had read at that age. I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Oh, wow. And then Carlos, well, he's an actor. He does a lot of short films and he'd been doing a bit with Netflix and I think he was sort of on the brink of a sort of American career but came home because of COVID. He sent in a beautiful audition, but my first response, because, the Australian industry and most young actors or all actors prioritise American work over Australian work. So I kind of thought, we're never going to get him. He'll get a Netflix offer or something like that. But he sent in a really personal message saying, I was bullied at school for the name Carlos. I stopped speaking Spanish. I sort of have disconnected a little bit from my Latinx heritage. And, this role is really personal for me and I'd love to be a part of bringing the Latinx community to Australian screens. So it's like, oh, wow, okay, well, it's resonated with him.
And then chemistry tests? Do you have to do a chemistry test with you, a chemistry test with Santi and her? Like, how do you put the pieces together? Because you might go, he's really great, she's really great, but how do you know what it'll be like when they get in a room?
We actually cast them before they were even in the same room together. So that was just potluck. We did a lot of chemistry tests with Santi and Vince, all the different Vinces. Yeah.
It's the baby of you and Kelsey Munro, who's a journalist this is her first screenplay?
That's right. Well, that has been produced. She was also working on a series about journalists before Bump, and that's how she met Dan Edwards and John Edwards.
How did the actual idea come about? Because she didn't have a surprise pregnancy. You didn't have a surprise pregnancy.
She did have close friends whose daughter had gone through with a teenage pregnancy and became a teenage mum, and that was one of the inspirations. The other one was she wrote it during her second maternity leave, and she was just sort of looking for ways to dramatically contextualise motherhood, and so she sort of invented this concept of a 16-year-old and that character type, an alpha, ambitious young girl with all these dreams, and then add that with a cryptic pregnancy, and hey presto, you've got, the wonderful premise of Bump.
Oh, he's had a baby.
Shut the front door.
Do you have any idea how lame it is to cheat on me and have some stoner baby?
What? Is this funny?
Ollie, can I help?
No, you can't.
The beauty of Kelsey Munro is she's really fresh eyes on our industry. She doesn't have a lot of sort of downloaded historical perceptions about what the Australian TV industry is. So that was fabulous.
What freshness did she bring?
Just very optimistic, very forthright, very committed to the half-hour format, where most of us existing in this landscape kind of almost had given up on the half-hour.
Can you talk me through that? I've heard you mention that before, the difference between a half-hour format and an hour format. I wasn't even aware of the difference from a creative point of view. And I suppose because I binged it like many people do with streaming now, I wasn't even aware that they were half-hour episodes.
Yeah, well, it's something that's been creeping up. I think Transparent, is half hours. Fleabag is half hours. We just never embraced it in Australia. All our sort of skit shows and comedies are half hours, but all our sort of dramas are hours. And that was sort of a scheduling thing or a perception thing or whatever.
Is it more value for the network or whoever
it would
is
be
paying
more,
the bills?
Yeah, to be more content points.
Yeah.
It would be
More bang for production buck?
There would definitely be a business decision behind that. But, you've got to put that aside when you're telling stories. It's just not always only about business.
And what's the difference between telling a half-hour story and a one-hour story?
I think half hours you just have to have a lot less fat. They're more focused. I feel they need to be sort of more expedient. In a 1 hour you have to use really sort of prosaic language. You sort of have an A plot, a B plot and a C plot. Mm-hmm. Maybe even a D plot. I think with the half hours, they're just more liberating and you can almost go for just an A story like we did for episode 6. It was just purely one story.
When did you decide to include COVID in the plot? And did you shoot it during COVID? Because the first time I noticed it was when Ollie was on the computer in the middle of the night and she said something about, do you know, since the pandemic, 10 million girls have stopped going to school or whatever it was. And we're like, oh, the pandemic. And then there was an elbow bump at the barbecue. Was that a difficult creative decision to decide whether to incorporate COVID into it, or it just was something you felt you had to do?
We were one of the first productions off the rank to go back on set. So we had to sort of work through all the guidelines and all the restrictions. It was all like brand new, so it was quite full on.
When did you shoot?
We started in early August.
Oh gosh, not long ago.
No, it was really quick. We delivered really fast. So, yeah, I think as we went through and this pandemic just kept on hanging around and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more waves, second waves and third waves. Yeah, when we were in the cutting room, it was a bit like, it seems ridiculous that Ollie and Santi are talking about going to Chile in the holidays. Well, yeah, it was a difficult decision because you think, will it date the show or will it look dated if we don't acknowledge it? So I think we just did very subtle,
Was it difficult to shoot with all the COVID restrictions?
Yeah, it was. Like, for instance, we couldn't get into high schools during the week. We had to go on a Saturday, which is very expensive, and you have to cram a whole lot of scenes into one day instead of 2 days. We couldn't get into hospitals. We had to sort of build our own hospital. We couldn't get babies under 3 months. Usually you can get a 2-week-old baby. We couldn't.
Where do you get a 2-week-old baby, Claudia? But where do you? Like, I imagine you've worked with babies a lot. Where do you go to get one?
Well, there's agencies, and I think they must have pamphlets at the birthing suites. And any parent who thinks, that might be a fun experience, they sign up. So I think we had, maybe 30 3-month-old babies. So, that was one of those days as a producer when you discover you can't get anything younger than a 3-month-old baby. I was like, okay, all of my problem-solving skills, I don't have anything to – we can't shoot. We have to wait until we can get – but, we just pushed ahead and we used 3-month-old babies.
Are there no fake babies?
There's dolls, yeah, there's the odd doll.
But you needed like some close-ups of some.
Yeah, we need to see the babies.
So what did you do? How did you solve that?
We just had to use 3-month-old babies.
Yeah.
As newborns.
It wasn't jarring though.
No,
because-
but it's sort of upsetting at that stage of the process. You just think, this is going to look ridiculous and it's not going to be believable. It's going to pull people out of the story, and you just sort of panic. There are always moments, there's days where you just panic. Like when we couldn't get into a hospital and there are no hospitals, you sort of go, oh no, I don't know how to solve this. Or we'd built a hospital, we'd scrapped the set and it was no longer available. And then we had to do a reshoot, and that was another day. We go, okay, I have no skills to, and then, I don't.
Why did you have to do a reshoot? Why would something like that happen?
Oh, there was sort of quarantining actors situations, and, there was all sorts of levels of havoc that COVID.
Did it make producing so much more complicated?
There was a lot of layers, yeah. But lucky, we had an amazing line producer, amazing production office. They bore the brunt of it, to be honest.
Is this your first experience of the binge, and what's that like?
Totally the first experience of the binge, so you can't compare it to any other show. So never been involved in a show that gets dumped on one day and gets consumed so quickly. It's sort of instant gratification for the whole team. Yeah, very different.
What was that day like for you?
It was sort of pretty heady. There's a lot of texts and emails flying around and phone calls, and weirdly they did it on New Year's Eve. So some people stumbled upon it, and then they would text. They said 6 o'clock, I've just started Bump, and then they'd ring me at midnight. I just finished Bump. Like, wow, that's so different.
So it's almost like making a film in a way, in terms of the way people consume it from start to finish.
Yeah, 5 hours. Yeah.
And when did you know it was going to be okay, like that it was good? Because obviously you're not just an actor, so it's not just an ego thing, but you're a producer, so...
Well, I guess when Stan came back and said, the numbers have been unprecedented and we want a second series. So
was that on the first day or the second day or the first week?
No. I think that was probably around maybe mid-January.
When will we see the next season of Bump?
I would say,
Seems
I hope
like you work fast.
Yeah, I really hope they do the same thing and launch it on New Year's Day 2021, but that's up to Stan.
That's way too far away.
Well, sorry.
Where are you at in the process now?
Tomorrow we will be doing our second day of plotting on episode 4. So we're going great guns.
I hope you enjoyed that. And if you haven't watched Bump yet, please run, don't walk over to Stan and watch it. It is such a great show. You can listen to more No Filter episodes on Spotify now. And if you missed the episode with Claudia Karvan from the start of the week, where we talked about her life and the other TV shows she's been in, like The Secret Life of Us and Love My Way, you can just scroll back in your feed and have a listen. This episode was produced by Mel Sauer. The executive producer of No Filter is Elissa Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on mamamia.com.au.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.